Ray McCall stared at the folded letter in his calloused hands. Outside, the morning fog rolled off the harbor like ghosts he'd long stopped naming. The wooden box on his dresser hadn't been opened in years, not since the last Veterans Day he spent alone. The scent of motor oil and yesterday's coffee clung to the kitchen, like old regrets. A soft country tune played low from the radio on the counter, the kind of song that didn't ask to be remembered but somehow always was. Ray didn't hum along. He just stood there in his worn house slippers, letter in hand, eyes narrowing, not out of anger but recognition. The envelope was standard white, creased at the corners, addressed to Raymond D. McCall. Government issue font, postmarked from the county office. His thumb ran along the edge, rough against the paper. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he moved slowly to the small round table by the window and sat down, the chair creaking in a voice more familiar than comforting. It was Eleanor, who noticed the light still on before sunrise. She didn't knock, just tapped once and pushed the door gently open. "Brought banana bread," she said, lifting the foil-covered plate. "Fresh out the oven, well." "Last night's oven," Ray grunted in acknowledgement, not unkindly. She placed the plate down and hovered a second, her gaze flicking between the unopened envelope and Ray's unshaven jaw. "You all right?" He finally tore the envelope open with a careful pull. Eyes scanned the text once, then again. "It's a summons," he said plainly, "something about illegal parking." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "You haven't driven that truck past Maine in months. They say I blocked access to a redevelopment zone." He sipped from a chipped mug of cold coffee. "It used to be a memorial, the one on 5th. She sat across from him. "They're tearing that down, turning it into condos." Ray's voice didn't rise, but something in it settled hard. He stood and walked toward the hallway closet, past framed black and white photos of men in uniform, faces blurred with age. Some had names underneath, some didn't. He opened the closet door and reached up. A small wooden box, its hinges darkened but polished, rested atop a wool scarf folded from decades back. The box was heavy not by weight but by the way he handled it. He brought it to the table and opened it without ceremony. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a silver star. It gleamed in the morning light. The ribbon had frayed at the edges, the engraving on the back still crisp. He didn't touch it, just looked. Eleanor leaned in slightly, eyes catching the name, Raymond D. McCall, Quang Tri, 1970. He folded the letter next to it. The two items sat like strangers who used to know each other well. He didn't look at Eleanor when he said, "I'll go," she nodded slowly. "Taking that with you." Ray didn't hesitate. "Not for them, for me to see if it still matters." Eleanor sat back, eyes misting just a little. "That metal's earned dust in that box, longer than some people have been alive." Ray let the corner of his mouth lift, but it wasn't quite a smile. Doesn't change what it meant. "I remember when they built that memorial," she said softly. "My brother's name is on one of those bricks. He was never big on ceremonies either, I know," Ray said, voice low. "That's why he sat next to me every parade." They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. Ray stood and moved to the back room. The hardwood floors creaked under his boots as he retrieved a small cloth bag from the corner cabinet. It had his shaving kit, an old map of Beaufort folded 4 ways, and a worn notebook with 5 names scribbled on the first page, only 2 of whom were still alive. He packed slowly, slipping the medal into the glove box, felt too final, without a few moments of reverence. He wrapped it in the flannel handkerchief he'd kept from the war, tucked into the box again, like folding memory into itself. He glanced once at the faded photograph on the fridge, him younger, with a group of boys leaning on a sandbag wall. Caleb Simmons Lopez, gone. He traced one corner of the picture with a thumb, and whispered something too soft to catch. Out front, the morning was starting to brighten. A dog barked across the street. The cafe near Main Street was already setting out chairs. He'd been going there every Wednesday for years, never said much, always tipped the waitress $1 crisp for the same cup of coffee. On his way out, he slipped the thermos into the cup holder of the Ford Ranger. The driver's seat groaned under his weight. He glanced around the cab. Nothing had changed. The pine tree air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror had long since given up its scent. But he left it there. Ritual mattered. He didn't wave to Eleanor as he backed out. But he left the porch light on. The courthouse smelled of pine cleaner and paperwork. But the air turned sour the moment Ray opened the box. It wasn't immediate. At first, people didn't notice him at all. He stood in the back, holding the box like it might shatter, waiting, while case after case filtered through the docket. A parking violation. A noise complaint. Someone arguing about a fence. The clerk at the front tapped keys with one hand and sipped sweet tea with the other. Two men near the side bench murmured about where to buy cranberry sauce last minute. A young mother scrolled through her phone, one leg bouncing nervously, while her toddler stacked goldfish crackers into neat orange towers. Ray's name was finally called. He rose slowly, stiff knees catching slightly against the polished tile. The sound of his boots, real leather softened with age, stood out in the artificial hush. No one applauded. No one turned. Not yet. Travis. Lee adjusted his tie as Ray approached. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, the kind of man who wore policy like armor and always spoke 2 decibels louder than necessary. Mr. McCall, Travis said, drawing out the syllables as though tasting them. You've been cited for obstructing public access to a city-owned redevelopment site. Ray didn't answer. He stepped toward the bench and gently placed the box on the desk. The gesture was slow, deliberate. The way a man moves when he's decided not to rush for anyone ever again. Travis glanced at the box, eyes flicking over it without curiosity. I'm not sure what that is, he said. But I'll remind you, this isn't about personal narratives or war stories. The sentence landed like a slap in an empty room. Judge Gaines looked up from her papers, eyes resting briefly on Ray, then on the box. She didn't interrupt. Not yet. Ray opened the lid. The metal sat beneath the glassy light like it had been waiting for this moment. Silver dignified, untouched, except by time. The edges caught a glint of the overhead bulbs. A murmur spread across the gallery. Is that real? Someone whispered too loud for it to be respectful. Looks like one of those things you get in surplus shops, said another with a laugh. Buried in the vowels, Ray didn't blink. He stood with hands at his sides, eyes resting not on the judge nor Travis, but somewhere far beyond the room. He spoke quietly, just enough for the microphone to catch. It was real enough to bleed for. The room didn't fall silent. It resisted. A snort came from the far left. A chuckle, then another. A young man near the back elbowed his friend and muttered, "Bet he just wants a discount on the ticket." Travis folded his arms. Mr. McCall, the city recognizes the sacrifices of all veterans, but this is a civil matter. Then maybe it needs to remember better. Ray said, not angry, not loud, just tired. Judge Gaines finally lifted her hand. The room quieted, but not out of respect, out of habit. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Mr. McCall, is there a statement you wish to make before the city proceeds? Ray's fingers hovered above the metal, but didn't touch it. No statement, he said. Just wanted to see if it still meant something. Across the room, Matt adjusted his lens. He hadn't moved since Ray walked in. He'd come to the courthouse for a school project, civic systems and local government, a class neither he nor his teacher cared much about. But something about the way the man stood there, unmoving, unreadable, made Matt raise his camera and press the shutter. The click was barely audible, but in that moment, It echoed. Judge Gaines's eyes narrowed slightly. Her gaze drifted to the gallery, then back to the box. Travis broke the silence with a faint scoff. "It's just a parking citation." "Your Honor, not Arlington." Someone laughed, this time openly, then another. The kind of laughter that doesn't come from comedy, but from discomfort. From not knowing what else to do when dignity walks into a room and no one has the language to answer it. Matt lowered his camera. Judge Gaines looked at Ray again. Her fingers tightened just slightly around the gavel back row. A man with gray stubble and calm eyes. Logan Bryce uncrossed his arms and leans forward. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The shift happened so quietly, most people wouldn't have noticed, if not for the way the light moved. The courtroom, for all its chatter and routine, had slowed, not because someone told it to, but because something was happening that hadn't happened in a long, long time. Logan Bryce stood from the back row. No one asked him to, no one told him he could. He didn't speak as he walked down the narrow aisle, boots tapping softly against the worn tile. There was no swagger, no hesitation, just a man who had seen too much to be unsure of what he was doing. Ray didn't turn to look, he didn't need to. There are some footsteps a man never forgets. Logan reached the table, where the wooden box still sat open, the silver star resting quietly inside like it had always belonged there. He paused, exhaled through his nose and reached out. Not in ownership, not in command, but in reverence. His fingers, clean and strong, lifted the metal, gently holding it like a folded flag. The room a minute before, still buzzing with half-suppressed chuckles and keyboard clicks, faded. Dust danced through the shafts of sunlight spilling in through the high courthouse windows. The clerk had stopped typing. One of the reporters lowered her phone mid-scroll. Even Travis Lee, mid-eye roll, was caught halfway into an exhale he didn't finish. Logan turned the metal over. Read the engraving to himself. Raymond D. McCall, Quang Tri, 1970. He looked up straight at the judge, then across the room to the gallery. His voice didn't echo, it didn't need to. "This man saved lives, including mine." No one moved. He stepped around the table, faced Ray, and stopped a foot away. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. 30 years, maybe 40. All in the space of a breath. No need for stories, no need for names. Some things you carry alone until someone else finally remembers how heavy they were. Logan raised his hand. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't ceremonial. It was the kind of salute you learn not in basic training, but in blood. Clean, sharp. Final. Ray didn't move. He didn't return it. He simply stood there, shoulders back, watching as a man honored what had once been hidden in a drawer and nearly forgotten by a town. In the judge's seat, Lillian Gaines slowly rose. She didn't look at Travis. She didn't glance at the courtroom. Her hand came up to her chest, not in imitation, but in memory of folded letters, of the knock on her door in 1983, of a photo she still kept tucked behind her mirror. Her voice didn't come yet. Not while Logan held the salute. Travis's eyes had dropped to the desk. He shuffled a piece of paper, realized he didn't need to, and set it down again. Whatever protest had been forming dissolved with the last sound of Logan's boot. Step behind the lens, Matt's hand trembled. He wasn't sure why. He'd taken hundreds of photos, school events, football games, even that one awkward wedding shoot for his aunt. But none of them felt like this. He didn't press the shutter. He just held the camera frozen, as if the act of clicking would shatter the silence into pieces they couldn't put back together. Logan lowered his arm, stepped back, returned the metal to its box, with a care that said everything louder than words ever could. And then finally, Judge Gaines spoke. "Court will recess, and maybe we'll start listening." No one remembered what the original case was about, just the way the silence had settled like snowfall. Even when Judge Gaines called the recess, no one reached for their phones, no one stood. It was as if the room itself had agreed to pause just long enough to let the air shift from stale to sacred. Outside sunlight stretched across the courthouse lawn, catching on the brass hooks of flagpoles and the fluttering red, white, blue ribbons tied to every fence post. A pair of city workers on ladders were quietly hanging up a banner for the upcoming Veterans Day parade. Inside, the stillness hadn't lifted. Judge Gaines returned after a few minutes, her robe flowing behind her like a ripple of history. She took her seat again, adjusted her glasses, and cleared her throat softly, though not a single person had spoken. "I've reviewed the citation," she began, her voice measured and low. "And while I understand the city's procedural reasoning, I find this case morally irrelevant." Travis shifted uncomfortably at his desk. His lips parted like he meant to speak, but no sound came. The folder in front of him lay unopened. "The court recognizes the right of municipalities to regulate public access," the judge continued. "But the space in question was, and still is, to many a place of remembrance. A memorial may lose its funding, it may lose its signage, but it does not lose its meaning." There were no murmurs this time, no coughs or foot shifting, just listening. She turned slightly toward Ray. "The charge is dismissed, thank you, Mr. McCall." Ray didn't nod, he didn't speak. He just reached forward, closed the box with both hands, and let them rest there a moment longer. Travis gathered his papers stiffly as he stood, his chair scraped loudly against the tile, a sound that felt too bright in the hushed room. He left without looking back. Logan remained seated, hands clasped in front of him. When the judge stood to leave, he rose and approached Ray slowly. No one stopped him. It didn't feel like the kind of day where rules applied. "You pulled me out," he said. His voice was gravel but steady. "I never said thank you." Ray looked up. Something flickered behind his eyes, not surprise, not emotion exactly. More like a recognition that didn't need to be voiced. "I didn't know who I was," pulling, Ray replied. "I know," Logan said. He tapped the side of the box once lightly. "But I do." The two men exchanged no further words. There was no embrace, no handshake, just a quiet understanding that passed between them like a folded flag from one hand to another. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor waited on the steps in a light sweater and sunglasses. She held a dented thermos in both hands and squinted toward the heavy oak doors. When Ray emerged, she handed it over wordlessly. He accepted it with a nod and unscrewed the lid. The coffee inside was still warm. "Told you someone would remember?" she said. He didn't smile, not quite, but the corner of his mouth lifted just enough to count. Behind them, volunteers were setting up rows of white folding chairs on the courthouse lawn. A boy helped his father arrange miniature flags along the walkway, sticking each one carefully into the soil, with two hands like it meant something. The judge emerged not long after. She didn't return to her chambers. Instead, she stepped down from the bench, something no one in town could ever recall her doing, mid-proceeding, and walked across the floor toward Ray. She didn't speak, just extended her hand. He looked at it for a moment, then stood. They shook once, firm, steady, quiet. The courtroom watched without blinking. In the back row, Matt reviewed the last photo on his camera. The image, Ray standing alone at the front metal, closed in the box light, falling on his shoulders, like the weight of something that had finally been seen. He uploaded it with no caption but one word. "Still, some men wear their medals on their chest, others carry them in their breath." The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the courthouse steps. Wind lifted the corner of a parade flyer taped to a lamppost. Down the street, the faint notes of a high school marching band drifted through the air, off-key horns, drumlines missing a beat, but determined all the same. Ray McCall sat on the stone ledge, thermos in one hand, The wooden box closed beside him. The metal remained untouched since the courtroom, but its presence seemed to hum louder now than it had inside. Matt lingered a few feet away, camera hanging from a strap across his chest, thumbs fidgeting with the edge of his jacket sleeves. He glanced at Ray, looked away, then back again. Finally, with a breath like stepping off a ledge, he spoke. "Sir, do you mind if I ask something?" Ray looked over slowly. "You already are." Matt managed a nervous laugh. "Right. Sorry, I mean what happened." Back then, with the metal. Ray studied him for a moment. The kid didn't look like much, skinny, quiet, a little unsure, but his eyes stayed steady. That counted for something. He nodded toward a small cafe across the street where a chalkboard sign read, "Veterans get 20% off. With love, Buford." "Come on," Ray said. "Can't talk history without coffee." Inside the cafe was warm, scented with cinnamon and pecan pie. The waitress behind the counter lit up when she saw Ray. "Well, hey there, sugar," she said, already pouring from a fresh pot. "You want your usual?" Ray nodded. "3 sugars, no cream." She looked at Matt and Logan, who had followed them in. "Friends of yours?" Ray didn't answer right away. He just looked at Logan. Logan gave the faintest nod. "Yeah, you could say that." They took a booth near the back. Ray sipped his coffee slowly, eyes drifting toward the window, before settling back on Matt. "It was Quang Tri," he began, "April 1970. Intel said the village was cleared. It wasn't." He paused, letting the silence settle. "We were bringing in medical supplies. I was on detail. Nothing heroic, just hauling crates. Then the first round hit. Tent went up like paper, screaming smoke. Sound got thin, like the world had gone underwater." Matt leaned forward, but didn't interrupt. "I heard a kid barely older than you calling for his mama," Ray said. "Didn't know his name, never saw his face, but I couldn't sit behind that wall and listen to that voice die out." He looked down at his mug, the coffee still steaming. "I didn't do it because I'm brave. I did it because I couldn't bear to listen to another kid call for his mama." Logan sat still. Then without a word he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cloth square, unfolded it. Inside was his Navy SEAL trident patch, edges frayed but gold still glinting. He placed it gently beside Ray's box. That day changed everything. "I became," he said. Ray didn't reply, didn't need to. A few locals had recognized them by now. People from the gallery who'd stayed silent, but had started to circle the edge of the room with glances and hesitant smiles. No one interrupted. Matt's voice came quieter than before. "If it's okay, I'd like to tell people what you just told me." Ray wasn't there for the Veterans Day ceremony, but somehow it felt like he was. The breeze carried the faintest scent of sweetgrass and old paper programs as people filed into the park. Folding chairs stretched in gentle arcs along the lawn, dew still clinging to their metal legs. A military band warmed up near the gazebo horn, notes bending and snapping back into tune, while schoolchildren in pressed shirts and flag pins clutched small stars and stripes with both hands. Matt stood beside the bench, not just any bench, the one dark wood anchored in stone, clean lines and steady weight. The plaque was already fixed but covered with a velvet cloth for ceremony. His hands rested on the folded triangle of the American flag he carried. Not regulation, not pristine, just the one Ray had kept all those years. The creases softened by time and touch. Logan arrived early. Dressed in full navy blues, the uniform sat stiff on his broad frame, a sharp contrast to the man's calm eyes. It was the first time he'd worn it in public since retirement. His boots clicked across the path, but he moved slowly, reverently. Judge Gaines arrived moments later, escorted by the town mayor. She wore a simple black dress with a single silver pin at the collar. Her gait was steady, her face unreadable, but when she saw the bench, her eyes flicked just briefly, like something under the surface stirred. The townspeople gathered, veterans in jackets covered with patches. Cafe workers still in aprons, a group of high schoolers fidgeting with the ends of flagpoles, and Eleanor, wearing the same sweater as last year, stood off to the side with her hands folded neatly over her purse. Matt cleared his throat. No microphone, no speeches prepared. Just memory. He placed the folded flag gently on the bench, hands lingering a second longer than necessary. Then stepped aside. Logan moved forward, pausing just in front of the crowd. He showed up when it counted, he said. Let's not forget how. The words were short, but they landed heavy. Not like a lesson, more like a reminder you didn't want to admit you needed. Judge Gaines followed. She stepped beside the bench, fingers brushing the velvet. In a single fluid motion, she pulled the cloth away, revealing the bronze plaque underneath. Some medals aren't worn, they're carried. Silence fell. Not out of awkwardness, but respect. Then Eleanor, her voice soft but clear, called gently, "Would you stand?" And the crowd rose. Every chair creaked softly in unison. No one filmed. No one clapped. It was not a moment for performance. Just stillness. Gratitude. Eleanor placed 2 fingers to her brow and held the salute. A few others followed, some uncertain, some firm. Across the park, the church bell chimed once. Just once, no more. In the front row, the waitress from the diner held a tissue close to her lips. She didn't wipe her tears, she let them be. One seat down, a boy in ROTC blues stared at the plaque, like he'd only now understood what the word service meant. After a pause that felt whole, Matt stepped back to his small canvas bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth and twine, a book, hand-bound. On its cover, a printed photograph, black and white, a bit grainy, of Ray at the courthouse. Medal in hand, shoulders square against the sunlight. He held it up and whispered more to the air than the crowd. Stories they never told. On a quiet Veterans Day morning, a folded flag and a silent bench told the story of a man who never asked to be remembered, only to be understood. His courage wasn't loud, and his kindness was never broadcast yet. It reached further than any speech ever could in a world that too often overlooks quiet strength. Ray McCall reminded us that true valor lives not in medals but in moments. Moments when someone shows up not for applause but because it's right. Like a porch light left on in early dawn, simple goodness has a way of guiding us home. If his story touched something in you, perhaps it's time to look again at the quiet heroes in your own life. The ones who never needed to be seen but always showed up when it mattered.